The morning sunlight washed over the streets of downtown Houston with the usual calmness expected on a Tuesday. The hum of city buses, the clinking of coffee mugs in cafe windows, and the sound of shoes on concrete made it feel like just another normal day. Offices were opening, people rushed to beat traffic, and vendors were setting up carts along the sidewalks. But inside the beige walls of the 5th Precinct Police Station, a decision was about to be made that would ripple through the entire department and change the lives of 2 officers permanently. Officers Jack Delaney and Craig Benson were already on patrol. Known throughout the department as aggressive and uncompromising, they wore their badges like armor and treated protocol like a suggestion. Years of unchecked behavior had emboldened them. They developed a reputation, not for excellence or heroism, but for intimidation. They targeted the powerless, harassed the vulnerable, and believed their uniforms gave them ultimate authority. Internal complaints stacked up in drawers like forgotten paperwork, lost under the weight of departmental favoritism and silence. That morning, as they cruised slowly through a business district near Midtown, Delaney squinted and nodded toward a woman standing beside a parked SUV. She was waiting quietly, dressed in a plain navy sweatshirt, black slacks, and sneakers. Her posture was relaxed, her expression unreadable. Nothing about her stood out to them, and that was exactly the problem. In their eyes, she looked like someone who didn't belong. Suspicious. Possibly homeless. Maybe loitering. Without discussion, they pulled the cruiser over. The car came to a jerking stop, tires scraping the curb. Benson stepped out first, adjusting his belt as he approached the woman with the swagger of someone who expected immediate compliance. Delaney followed closely behind, hand already resting on the hilt of his taser. The woman looked up as they approached, but said nothing. She remained composed, standing silently by the SUV. "What are you doing here?" Benson snapped. "I'm waiting for someone," she replied calmly. "You can't stand around here," Delaney barked. "This isn't a bus stop. Move it along." She didn't argue. She simply nodded slightly and gestured to the bakery nearby. "My husband is inside. He's grabbing us coffee." Delaney stepped closer. "I said move. I don't care if the Pope is in there." Before she could respond, Benson slapped the paper coffee cup from her hand, its contents splashing across the sidewalk. Delaney grabbed her by the wrist, twisting it behind her back. The woman staggered, her other hand bracing against the SUV. "Stop resisting," Delaney hissed, tightening his grip. "I'm not," she said, her voice even. "You're making a mistake." A few pedestrians froze on the opposite sidewalk. One man started filming with his phone, but kept a safe distance. Another woman gasped, clutching her handbag. No one moved to intervene. Then Benson struck her, a sharp slap across her face. The sound cracked through the morning air like a whip. She didn't flinch. Her eyes remained steady. "You two have no idea what you've just done," she said softly. "But you'll find out." And then she walked away. The officers chuckled. Benson shouted something after her, but she didn't turn back. There was no threat in her voice, no retaliation. Only poise. Only promise. By noon, their names would be spoken in meetings they'd never be invited to. By dusk, they'd wish they had never left their squad car that morning. 3 hours later, the main doors to the precinct swung open. Conversations died mid-sentence. The buzz of office phones seemed to fade into the background. All eyes turned toward the tall woman in a military police officer's uniform. Her boots struck the floor like a metronome, steady, deliberate. Her nameplate read Major S. Walker. Following her were 2 sharply dressed men, one in a federal badge-labeled blazer, the other clutching a leather-bound folder with the Internal Affairs seal pressed in gold. She walked directly to the captain's office. Inside, Captain Rick Hollings was on a phone call but immediately stood up. He didn't need a name or introduction. Her presence said enough. Major Savannah Walker removed her cap and placed it precisely on the desk. Then, with a calm, clear voice, she recounted everything: the unprovoked assault, the slurs, the violence, the bystanders, and the fact that she'd remained silent not out of fear, but discipline. The captain's face lost color. He called for Officers Delaney and Benson. They entered with casual arrogance until they saw her in uniform. Benson's smirk faltered. Delaney muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." But it was no joke. The footage had already been reviewed by Internal Affairs. 3 angles. Clean audio. Every curse word. Every strike. Every unlawful command. Their badges meant nothing now. "You've not only assaulted a citizen," Major Walker said coolly, "you assaulted a decorated officer of the United States Military Police. And you did it in uniform, in public, while representing this city." They tried to backpedal. Claimed she didn't identify herself. claimed she was acting hostile. But none of it held. The videos showed her calm, compliant, and restrained. Their words, their actions, all there. And so were the consequences. By evening, news outlets were outside the precinct. Houston officers assault military police officer blared across headlines. Social media ignited with fury. Local leaders and national figures demanded justice. Calls to suspend the officers were immediate. Civil rights organizations mobilized. Petitions exploded. Major Walker, however, remained off camera. She declined interviews, refused press requests, and spoke only through the proper channels. Her silence was intentional. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a professional who understood that true justice didn't come from public chaos, but through institutional reckoning. Within days, both officers were placed on unpaid suspension. But the story didn't die there. More allegations surfaced. Citizens came forward with prior incidents. A retired school teacher, a delivery driver, a single mother. Each had a story about Officer Delaney or Benson, and each had been ignored until now. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed. Cameras were barred, but the hallway overflowed with press and citizens. The city wanted accountability. The courtroom held a mirror to a broken culture. Delaney and Benson were charged with assault, misconduct, abuse of authority, and obstruction. They pled not guilty. Then Major Walker took the stand. In uniform, she described the moment her wrist was twisted, the sting of the slap, the crowd's silence, and why she chose not to retaliate. Her words were clear and powerful, not emotional, but principled. "I didn't fight back," she said, "because the badge I wear means more to me than pride. It stands for justice. And justice requires discipline, even when your instinct screams for vengeance." Her testimony moved many to tears. Even the judge sat quietly for a moment after she finished. The verdict was unanimous: guilty. Delaney and Benson were stripped of their positions, dishonorably discharged from the force, and sentenced to 18 months in federal custody with no chance of early release. But their punishment didn't end in the courtroom. Their names became symbols of a failed system studied in training academies, dissected in civil rights lectures, and forever attached to a department forced into reform. The Houston Police Department launched a full audit. Dozens of old complaints were reopened. Policies were rewritten. The police chief resigned. New leadership was installed. Officers were retrained in bias response, civilian engagement, and accountability. Major Savannah Walker received the Medal of Civil Valor from the mayor during a quiet ceremony attended by military and civic leaders. She gave no speech. She simply saluted, shook hands, and returned to her post. Her story was integrated into academy curriculum nationwide as an example of moral authority, of what real courage looks like when violence offers the easier path. She never asked to become a symbol. She simply expected to be treated with dignity. This was never about revenge. It was about a broken assumption, the belief that you could measure someone's worth by how quietly they stood when confronted. But in Major Walker's silence was something louder than any scream. It was the sound of systems cracking. It was the sound of justice moving forward, no matter how long it had been ignored. In the end, this wasn't just a story about two disgraced officers. It was about the power of presence, of standing tall when others try to shove you down, of choosing law over rage, of using the very system meant to fail you to correct itself. And that morning in downtown Houston would no longer be remembered for its quiet beginning. It would be remembered for the moment someone refused to be invisible, and in doing so, made everything visible.